Africa says its development must be considered when drafting climate change policies. The African group of negotiators are at the UN Climate Change Conference COP25. It's arguing, however, that the continent only contributes 4% of the world's carbon emissions.
As environmentalists continue to push for the end of fossil fuel usage, Africa is asking for more support. It says the road to sustainability shouldn't neglect the continent's development agenda.
Shows that African countries are paying between 2 to 9% of their GDP just to deal with the adaptation impacts in their countries. So Africa is already paying 2 to 9% of its GDP to deal with an issue that Africa is not the cause of. Africa emissions are 4%. Historically, Africa is the lowest, with the lowest carbon footprint as a continent.
The group says it's not moving away from the Paris Agreement, but Africa has special circumstances that must be acknowledged and addressed.
This agreement, and we have a process under the presidency to further discuss the African special circumstances with a simple acknowledgement that what is under the convention continues because we are adopting the Paris Agreement under the convention. It has taken some time for different reasons. It went from 2015 until last year, where we were very clear that this issue has to be taken forward.
The group also wants financial means and resources to support its climate change adaptation ambitions.
Africa has a role to play, but Africa needs to receive means of implementation. We need to receive financial resources, technology transfer, capacity building, and those are not outrageous asks that we have. Those are contained in the convention.
Africa's reliance on fossil fuel is still a contentious issue. The continent, which suffers the most damage from climate change, still needs to figure out the balance between economic development and environmental sustainability.
And that when our country uses its finances, it needs to question whether its investment in renewable energy or any energy source is for the good of the planet and of its people. And we are saying that countries or African countries should choose solutions that are sustainable, that are equitable, and that does not leave anyone behind, including communities in vulnerable and impoverished communities.
Deliberations and negotiations will continue on Monday. Environmental ministers from member states will deliver their country statements. Noma Bolani, SABC News, Madrid, Spain.
And for the latest, we now cross to our reporter Noma Bolani in Madrid in Spain. Noma, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the Globe. Now, the Climate Change Summit has been going on for a week now. What are some of the issues that have emerged so far at the conference, taking into cognizance that we've seen thousands of protesters calling for more climate change policies?
Yes, Simpiwe, good evening. Here in Madrid, a lot of the protests have taken center stage at COP25. A lot of activism happening about, world leaders not committing to the Paris Agreement. We know that the agreement is an implementation phase and there isn't much action coming from the different countries, especially the developed world, who are the biggest emitters and the biggest polluters of the air. So a lot has been happening in terms of the negotiations about who exactly must pay for what. There's talks about loss and damage, who must contribute to the adaptation as well as mitigation of climate change, especially in Africa. So in Africa, they are the worst affected by climate change, even though they are not the biggest polluters of the climate. We have a lot of the carbon emissions moving down from Europe, which is an industrialized, developed area, and the pollution comes down and hovers over Africa, affecting the continent severely. So there's a lot of deadlock in terms of the talks of how exactly adaptation and mitigation must be financed.
Well, we see countries continuing to disagree on the targets for cutting carbon emissions, Noma, and plans to increase these targets have not been included in the agenda for COP25's final agreement. So there's been quite a few protests we've seen and marches by activists. What can we expect from the summit tomorrow?
Well, tomorrow COP25 is shut down, but the environmental ministers from Africa are meeting tomorrow to basically set the agenda for the high-level talks which begin on Monday. The minister Barbara Creasy is taking up presidency as the minister, as the president of that meeting, and we'll see tomorrow what exactly Africa's position is from the environmental ministers are. We do understand that they're calling for financing, they're calling for assistance in terms of technology to move away from fossil fuel usage in order for them to reach their targets. Today, the press briefing, the chairperson of the African group of negotiators saying they want to keep to the targets that they signed with the Paris Agreement, but they're saying that, you know, with the economies that they have and the African countries being indebted, it's very difficult for them to keep up with their targets because they need the help from the developed countries.
Now, the conference moves into its final week from Monday. Any visible signs that negotiators are close to finding each other? And can we really expect a credible outcome at the end of next week?
There's a lot of calls to say there needs to be decisions, decisive action taken here so that next year, 2020, we can see other targets being reached. Looking at the negotiations this past week, it doesn't seem that there's been any movement towards those decisions being taken. It's going to be a hectic week of negotiations starting from Monday, so it's yet to be seen if there'll be any improvements.
All right, Noma, I'm going to let you go for tonight, and so you keep an eye and an ear on the ground for us there. Thank you so much for joining us.